Kicked off last show by saying there was a whole different vibe in Blacksburg, Virginia, because of the win at NC State. This week, or today on Wednesday, it sounds like there's a whole different vibe because the Board of Visitors just wrote the biggest check, athletics check in program history, as we come to you here live from Blacksburg, Virginia on October 1st, year of our Lord 2025. Completely different vibe. A lot of people asking questions about what is going on with all these $220 million, and we'll try to get to some of that. So make sure if you have questions about anything regarding the football team, Virginia Tech athletics as a whole, dump them in the chat. Got a lot going on. Hearing some things here this afternoon of things that we expected, but now it sounds like some firm timelines on things. We'll cover, obviously, talking with Philip Montgomery yesterday at his press conference today at his practice availability, as well as we'll bring on Cam Lemons from the Wake Forest 24/7 site and preview the Wake Forest matchup. So do a little bit of everything here on this Wednesday, October 1st. And honestly, while we have Cam, we'll jump on it and kick it off with him, bro. What's up, man?
Oh, is that perfect timing for me?
I was about to say, we'll jump into that first. How we doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Jumped on with Cam earlier over at Demon Deacons. What is it for 24/7 Wake? What is it called?
Deacon Digest. A lot of D's. A lot of
Digest. There we go. First off, how are you doing, man?
Good. Just, having a wonderful win today. I thought all day today that it was Thursday. I kind of tweeted something kind of out being like, ACC, where's the availability reports? One of my Wake Forest guys was like, it's Wednesday. And I was like, look, it's been one of those weeks.
Yeah. And I think that's a great place to start because I think Dicker even mentioned it in his press conference. He said, well, the availability report would come out later. And obviously,
that's why it threw me off.
Yeah. Because I was reading through that. So obviously, I think kicking it off, biggest question, running back Damon Claiborne, quarterback Robbie Ashford. What's their status? What are you hearing? Anything updated on them?
With Robbie Ashford, I'd be absolutely stunned if he didn't play right now. I know the brace was big for him, but he told us after the press conference on Saturday afternoon, as long as I'm not dead, I'm gonna be playing on Saturday.
Yeah.
So I tend to believe him there. Damon is one of those ones where I think he's a true questionable, and not just because of a nature of an injury, but just because there's a lot going on. It looked like, during the game, I don't want to say it was a dislocated shoulder, but it looked like he had a bit of a dead arm during like a bits and pieces of it, which is never something you want to have as a running back trying to have 3 points of contact. And then it also looked like he re-injured the rib injury as well. So there's a lot going on. I would still at this point be surprised if he didn't play, but I think that's going to be one that we're still be watching kind of up until that Saturday availability report. Right now, I lean them to be in, but it's just one of those touch and go as you kind of go along.
Yeah, like I said, both those are really big. And it's funny, Robbie Ashford actually had crossover with the interim head coach, Philip Montgomery, back at Auburn.
Oh, yeah.
Virginia Tech staff is very familiar with Damon Claiborne, both recruiting him out of high school. And also, obviously never entered the portal, but they're very familiar with Claiborne.
And with Damon, it was actually funny. I meant to use it in a story and I didn't. I asked him at ACC Media Days, what was one place that he's, wanted. I asked him what's the toughest place to play and one place he wanted to get back to. And he was like, both of them are the same answer. He wanted to come back to Blacksburg. That was the number one answer on his board. He was like, I am so ready to play there. It's just the environment's different. And I was like, okay, well, now I know you're banged up. Does that matter a little more for him wanting to play that? So we'll see if that happens.
I know so many interesting dynamics. Donovan Green going up against his older team. And like we were talking about earlier,
Braylon Johnson's going to get a start for Wake.
Yeah. How about that? I guess jumping in with that, who are some of those other defensive guys? Like I know Quincy Bryan, I think he got a shout out. Braylon Johnson and those blitz looks. Like how do they disguise the coverage, and what are some of those other guys on defense that have stood out?
So it's interesting because Scotty Hazelton, and I made a video on it during when they first hired him, he's really transformed himself. He'd started with he's like back in Kansas State and at Michigan State. He was more of a kind of a cover two kind of guy. He loved staying in cover two, which is now morphed into more of like a Tampa 3 sort of thing. They're kind of the same thing in a sense. This year, they've been really fine with just staying in a cover one high shell. Like they've kind of had Braylon Johnson. It used to be Rashawn Tongue just in a sort of a center field kind of role and letting a Nick Anderson, a Devon Patterson. I think Devon's someone to really look out for in this game. He's someone that he's one of their better players. He plays kind of, they call it, I think, the star position. It's just Rover, just a different name for it. Everyone has their fancy names for what that nickel position is, but he's going to come up in run support. He's going to be out in pass support. Devon's, I think there's a family connection that I believe he's cousins with Christian Ellis. So there's a fun little family dynamic going on there. But Devon's someone I'm really looking for, especially when Virginia Tech's going to run the ball and try to run it as well as they do. I think these are two teams that I believe, I was looking at CFE graphs earlier. I think they're both in the bottom 10 of rushing rate over expectancy, which is essentially how often are teams just running the ball against them. And so I think one thing Wake's going to try to do is limit a Terrion Stewart and say, okay, look, Devon, Frank Cusano, if he's injured, and maybe not, we'll see it there. Aiden Hall, linebacker, has had a really, really good year. I think those are some guys that we're going to look at, see how can they really help in run support right now.
You bring up a really great point there, talking about the defensive line on both sides and not trying to get that run game going. I believe it was also in the press conference where he talked about this is probably the best defensive line we're going to go against, or the best group that we've seen, which is pretty high praise, that they've had a decent schedule. What have you seen from Virginia Tech's defensive line, and what does that force Wake into doing?
Yeah, I think it's been not as great as I expected coming into the year, but it's still been really good. And I think that's, I look at a guy like Ben Bell, and he's someone that I know Ole Miss was really, really high on. And, there's certain teams where I go, your evaluation of a player is a little bit better than something else. And I think Ole Miss at DN is somewhere where I go, okay, like I can see what's going on with you right there. Elijah Fall, I think I'm going to make sure I'm pronouncing his name right. He's been a really, really good player, I think, in my eyes, at kind of that left end. Kamari Copeland at tackle. I remember Wake was kind of involved for a little bit, but then couldn't figure out if they could even get him in the school. And now he ended up at Virginia Tech. I remember his strength numbers during his recruitment were just insane. And you can see that on the film. I think in the pass rush game, there's not that much juice there, but in that run game, which is something they're really going to have, he can definitely fill a gap for you. And I think there are names like that I'm really, not excited because obviously, wanting Wake to win there, but I'm excited to see kind of that matchup against a guy like, Melvin Ciani, someone who Wake Forest, during spring, he missed all the spring camp. They brought him in from Temple, and then fall camp, he performed so well that they renegotiated his deal. Yeah. And he's been honestly worth every kind of penny of that. He hasn't been, some otherworldly first round talent, but you look around offensive linemen and you trying to go get another left tackle in the portal. I don't really think so. And so I'm looking to see what that happens against a guy like him, a guy like Philippe Famo at right tackle, who was a really prized possession. But I think, the really important game is going to be the defensive tackles versus Wake's interior line. I have a lot of faith in George Sell. He's been a stalwart at Wake Forest for the last few years. I think Devin Kalani's been good, but had some moments of either putting people on the ground or him getting put on the ground. So I think, what does that matchup look like there? And George Stee, where, Wake Forest had Clinton Richard at their starting left guard. He won the starting job, but then two other guards that were supposed to be kind of in the mix there left the team for, medical reasons. Yeah. And so now and then Clinton Richard, broke his foot on one of the last drives against Kennesaw State. So you're really down to your fourth guy that's starting at left guard. Yeah. And George has been a guy that I've liked a lot. I think he's got some athleticism to him. He's got some raw power to him, but it's different being a guy that's being a converted tackle now playing guard. And you can see it sometimes where it's just all not there. It's fine. He's in his, I think, second year. That's completely fine. But, this is a game where you're going up against some really good players. I'm sure Virginia Tech's going to bring in some linebackers on the blitzes too to really disguise that. You've got to be on your game against this defensive front.
It sounds like a lot like Virginia Tech with that Wake front. You just really couldn't catch a break with some of the injury bugs and just things going around. How about some of those offensive weapons? Obviously, outside of Claiborne, outside at wide receiver, who's someone that has had the year that you expected, and maybe someone still expecting to maybe step up there?
Yeah, I think so far Micah Mays has had about the year that I've expected. I never really came into this year thinking that Wake would throw the ball 35, 40 times. That just, given the personnel at quarterback, is not really a slight at Robbie Ashford, but given what Robbie's strengths are, what Damon Claiborne's strengths are, what the strengths of the team, this would be an offense that I thought Wake would have, maybe 20-ish targets a game to kind of mosey around. And Damon Claiborne's probably going to get about 5 to 6 of those a game. So you don't really have that many to spread around the receivers. But I think Micah Mays has had a really good impact in terms of what I expected out of him so far. He's been a really reliable third down weapon. He's had a couple of explosive plays, both just down sidelines and also kind of they love running a little mesh concept. He's always sitting there right in the middle of the zone. I really like that out of him. Someone that's blown up out of nowhere has been Chris Barnes. Chris Barnes came in. He transferred in from Washington State last year. He redshirted. They wanted to play him last year, and then he got injured. Comes in this year, and you look at him. He's listed at about 5'8". I'm 5'7", 5. I'm a hinge 5'8". Me and him look about the same height to each other, and you're like, okay, he's a kind of little jitterbug kind of guy, reminiscent of another former Virginia person that goes to Wake Forest, Greg Dortch. Yeah. But then you kind of go back to him and you're like, no, you're running in like the low 10s in the 100-meter dash, and you've got some speed to you. I don't know really what happened to you. And now he's been everywhere. He's run a kickoff back for a touchdown. Any sort of screen pass has been insane. He's had a couple of stop and goes that have just gone for about 50, 60 yards. He's been a really good big play receiver, not just in terms of just the screens, but he's gone up and gotten the ball too. He fights through contact while being kind of compact. And I think it's just a really hard matchup, because if you can't press him, you're not really going to catch him.
So when you talk about him, was he a guy who came in like prior to Dicker even moving over from Washington State? You said he came in a year and a half ago.
No, so he came in the spring. So he came in the spring. So he was one of the They brought over, I think 10 people from Washington State with Dicker, and so he came in there. And it was something where Wake really had to retool that slot room. One of their best receivers, Deuce Alexander, is now at Ole Miss. It's doing really well at Ole Miss too, and so you really had to retool what they had to do over there.
And now something I took away, and like we have to get to it, the elephant in the room. I know Wake obviously feels a certain way about the game last week at Georgia Tech, and obviously how that one ended. He said they were, I think quoted exactly saying they're aggressively pissed off. Yes. What is the vibe of that locker room and the team right now coming off? A big letdown spot. You have a team that's ranked. You hear all these things from the outside, pretty much on the ropes, and you feel like you should have won that game. How does the team feel like they're responding this week?
I was a little shocked when I got some text messages back from people earlier in the day and yesterday as well, because it's one of those really hard spots where win or lose, that game took a lot of emotion. It would have taken a lot of emotion out of you. Even if the officials get the calls correct on that play, and you just take knees, that was an aggressive, physical, emotional game. So it's hard to come back from that. But I texted around some people in the program earlier in the day, and everyone has just been business as usual. It has been, we are starting to try to prove how tough we are. And that doesn't really just mean you go out against one team that's physical. You do it whether you win or don't come up short. That means you're there. That means you need to prove it again. It's not just a one game thing. It's the 1 week season sort of thing. You got to prove it again and again every week. Some of that's also a mantra of people. You take things with a grain of salt, saying, okay, this is what they have to say. But I do think that's something that it was kind of looking in a mirror with that game of Wake and Georgia Tech. This is what you kind of want to be in year 3 or 4 of this tough of a program. And I think there's been a big challenge, not just from the coaches, but from the seniors and from the leadership of saying, that can't just be a 1 week thing. We're going to a hostile environment. Virginia Tech hasn't quit. I think sometimes you see the coach getting fired and go, well, that team's going to quit. We can walk up there, get a win. No, that's not. We can obviously see what happened in NC State. That's not what happened. I think that was probably put on a big little TV on Sunday saying, hey, whether or not you won that game, that team just went and beat a team that beat you without their head coach. So you've got to go in there and be about your business. And I think that's something that Wake, I think so far has sounded like they're handling that pretty well.
That's great. Well, what has a guy like Nick Anderson shown this year? Obviously, I think Virginia Tech fans can recall when he was back in a walk-on, I believe in 2020, 3 interceptions that effectively ended Hendon Hooker's run at Virginia Tech as a walk-on guy. I think a guy who had well over 100 tackles a season ago. Seems just like a stalwart on that defense. Kind of crazy to think with the new college football, a guy like that maybe wouldn't have had a roster opportunity being a walk-on. But What does he mean to this defense?
I think he means everything. He's a guy that when he's a guy that when you put in certain situations, the fan base kind of gets a little mixed on him certain times. He is what he is. He's 5'11", 6 foot, about 190, 200 pounds. You put him on a guy that's going to run a 4.4, he's going to get beat. Certain things are going to happen there. But what he does is he just tackles well, and he's in on every play. And that shows up not just when you're watching film, but it shows up with everyone that's on the defense going, look, man, this dude has whatever physical limitations it has. He's not a 5-star. He's not someone coming out just heralded and all this. He doesn't look like he's not a get off the bus kind of guy that you see. He's a 6'2", 200-pound safety. No, but this dude, it doesn't matter. He's still playing with his hair on fire. And that's something where, I think sometimes you guys get to be who they are and they kind of stop and you're like, you know what? He's just a fine college player. All right. He's been someone that I've honestly been really impressed with this year in terms of it just looks like he's taken, his tackling ability, his play recognition to another level. And he's been, I was watching last week and there's a couple of times he's just shellacking Haynes King. And that's not an easy guy to bring down by yourself. And he's just in there. And I think as a captain, people see that and say, that's where I want to be. It doesn't matter, especially at a place like Wake, you're a developmental guy. He's sort of the ultimate story of he was a pure walk-on that is now, a multi-time all ACC player and is still trying to get better and better. That means a lot in the locker room.
Once again, everyone, talking to Cam Lemons over from the Demon Deacon Digest. Make sure to drop any questions you have for him in the chat. Okay, pretty basic one. Maybe one guy that you're watching on offense and one guy on defense, and why particularly in this matchup.
Like for Virginia Tech?
Yeah. No. For Wake. One guy
Wake.
that you think has a matchup advantage or that you're monitoring going into the game.
I think starting on defense, I'm really going to look at Mateen Abiragba. I'm looking at him at a defensive tackle. I think Virginia Tech's offensive line patchwork. I think last week they got better. I think last week they just I finished watching that probably a couple hours ago, and I was like, man, for the second time, I was like, these guys got better.
But how much is that? Like NC State's also allowed quite a few points, so it's like
Mateen also did well against NC State as well, and so that's where I go. Okay, I think Mateen has kind of quietly evolved into one of the best defensive tackles in the ACC, and so this is going to be a good test for him of where is your focus, Mateen? Like, is your focus on, are you getting down about yourself, or are you going to take advantage of a matchup that I think you're going to have some pretty good advantages in? On offense, I honestly think, it's tough, but I think a guy like Chris Barnes, I mentioned him earlier, has a really good matchup. I'm not saying I want to shy away from a Micah or a Sterling on the outside, but the one question I have about Virginia Tech defensively, just kind of red lights, is who and what is playing linebacker. Yeah, and I think
great question.
Being able to test these guys with a lot of orbits, a lot of motion, bring people across the middle, that's going to put a lot of strain not only on a nickel that's chased him around, but that's going to put strain on a linebacker that's probably covering that some sort of vacancy in the middle of the field. And so, what's going to happen when a guy like, Jaden Keller is going to be in there? Noah Chambers, I know he's young, he looked good. Is that a one-time thing, or are you going to test that again? Caleb Spencer, I like what I saw. Again, is that a one-time thing, or is that going to be who you are now? So I think Wade's going to try to test that middle of the field a little bit and just see how off balance they can get them.
So I'll get you out of here on this one. More of like a 1,000-foot big meta question. These are two programs obviously sort of on the rebuild. They know what's coming down the pipe. We talked about it, expansion, different things. Where would you rank where Wake Forest is now behind Dickert's leadership and just overall the infrastructure that they're building?
I kind of put them sort of kind of in the mid tier of the ACC. They're not in the bottom tier because we see what's happening at Stanford, and that's just awful. I think it's hard with the ACC because you're playing a little bit of liar's poker of who has what money, and I know, Wake's never going to have the most money, but I think one thing that we've started being able to see this year is the talent evaluation from Dickert. I think Clausen was good at talent evaluating, but wasn't necessarily willing to spend from time to time. And I think now you see, I think one of the big things is cornerback. Wake's cornerbacks the last 2 years were just atrocious. There was probably one or two guys each year that were good, and then everyone else was just hold your breath. And
a
this
lot of
year,
that was eval driven, like you're saying,
a lot of it's eval driven. A lot of it is a willingness to spend in the portal.
Yeah.
You don't spend a ton of money, but you look at what they have this year. I know Ashad Williams and Sasha Garcia are kind of on the men right now, but Karan Prunty is a really good corner. And they fought off some good schools for him. Lardarius Webb came from South Alabama, really good player. Trayvon West developed. They kept him and then developed and then turned into probably a fine player. Braylon Johnson. I know Virginia Tech kind of and I think Virginia Tech necessarily wasn't the happiest losing him, but I also think they saw maybe a new vision for him would be somewhere else. But I think Virginia Tech even saw he can play football, it just might not be at certain positions. And so I think just being able to take shots on these types of people, a guy at tight end, Any Falai, and he has probably been, I think, visually and physically the best tight end Wake's had in the last 6-7 years. And that's sometimes it's a low bar, but you start seeing these things and you go, okay, I at least see where you're going with a lot of these things and a lot of your evals. And you started talking to guys at ACC Media Day and during fall camp and stuff, and you asked them about where things, why did you stay?
Working to get that mic back.
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah, no, we got you.
I don't know how that came out, but yeah, you started talking to players at Media Day and fall camp and stuff, and you asked them, did you think a change needed to be made? And even Damon very much on the record was like, yes, not so much that no one hated Dave Clawson, and Dave Clawson will probably have a statue rightfully at Wake Forest, but I think how Jake Dickert approaches the portal, high school, and the new age of college football, I think it was time. And I think they're in a fine place. Wake's never going to be someone that's spending at a Miami, a Florida State, any sort of that level. So I think if you're going to not be able to spend at, the top 3-4 level, you're not going to be a Boston College that's going to sit here and spend no money. Wake's going to try to spend at least something to win. But I think if you're going to do that, you need to come to a little better grasp of what the reality is currently of college sports and be okay with it. And I think at some points Dave wasn't fond of it. He wanted to be a coach more than he wanted to be a CEO, which I respect the hell out of. But I think
it's just a different time.
It's a different time, and I think Jake has started trying to find that line of being the coach he is and being the CEO. And I think that positions Wake in a fine position. They're not in the most advantageous position. They're still going to be behind certain schools. Yeah. But I think it gives them a chance. And I think that's what you saw a little bit on Saturday of look, because Georgia Tech spends a lot of money. We know Georgia Tech is a decent spender. But the fact that they were able to go toe-to-toe with a team that's going toe-to-toe with UGA and that beat Clemson.
Took out of Clemson, yeah.
That, without as much money, okay, you can be on the right path. You still need some money to get to where you want to go, but you're at least on the right path. And I think that puts you probably somewhere in the middle tier, because I think sometimes in the ACC, you spin the wheel and just figure out, all right, you're 5th, you're 6th, you're 7th this year. And so that's what
all right. Well, no pressure. If you want to, how do you see the game going out? Do you have a prediction?
I mean, it's the fun. I don't want to hedge, but I think the hedge is fully on if Robbie Ashford is playing. If you tell me they play, I think Wake wins this one in a 24 to 20 kind of game. I think this game is slow, no matter what. I think both teams just.
I don't see a lot of points. I don't see a lot of
points. I think both these teams just want to play ball control. And funny enough, I think in that environment, I think this is an environment that doesn't really rattle Robbie, because I think he's played at every big school that you would.
I was about to say, yeah.
At this point in time, but I think this is something where Wake tries to play a slow control game no matter what. If Damon does, I think Damon's probably a bigger worry than Robbie in terms of how it changes the game flow. If Damon doesn't play, I just think that Virginia Tech just leans on Wake a little more, because I think Wake feels like they have to pass a little more. If Robbie doesn't play and Damon does, I think it comes down to last possession or two. And I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. It's going to come down to who's better in the red zone. I think Wake's the a stoppable force in the red zone, and Virginia Tech is a movable object in the red zone. And so whoever can convert these field goals into touchdowns, I think is going to be able to win the game. I feel a lot more comfortable saying Wake has a chance to get the touchdowns if Devon's in there.
Yeah.
But I also think, we've only had one good game of a Terrion Stewart at Virginia Tech, really healthy. And so it's hard to be like, well, last week they looked pretty good.
Yeah.
So
small sample size, weird sample size with so much going on. But yeah, man, I appreciate you jumping on. Cam, let everyone know before you jump off where everyone can find you and your work.
Yeah. You can find me at the 24/7 Sports Network, Demon Deacon Digest, and on Twitter if you want bad Braves and Eagles tweets, at @CamLemons_.
Okay, right on, man. Appreciate you jumping on here. It was a ton of fun, and yeah, let's have some fun this Saturday.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man. See ya. Yeah, that was Cam Lemons. Cam Lemons over from the Demon Deacon Digest on 24/7. Appreciate him jumping on there, going a little behind the scenes on what Wake had. But yeah, jumping back into obviously some other news for Virginia Tech. A lot of on-field momentum, obviously, but tying that in with off-the-field momentum, it really does feel like a really just big inflection point and reset point for the whole athletics department. You have some administrators, futures in flux, but the Board of Visitors vote definitely ensures that next era of Virginia Tech football won't be starved for resources like it has been, and obviously prior years with the way things have gone. So going into the vote, like I said, the schedule got a little thrown off there, but works out. So talking about the budget vote, obviously, recap. Obviously, it was passed 13-1. I know a lot made of the detractor Nancy Dye. Obviously, a lot goes into these. Like, I think this was something that we knew going in was always going to pass. We felt very confident that it was going to pass. There's obviously a lot of lobbying and different things, but you're elected onto this position and you have to speak pretty much for your constituents or whoever. And people are going to obviously stand up for what they feel is necessary. But it obviously passed convincingly, 13-1. So 47.1 million this year, 229.2 across the 4 years. This will fall into student fees, as was brought up with the part of the issue, donor expectations, and the institutional support is going to be maxed out. So it's going to really vault you into that top tier of the ACC. Like I said, I know some people are talking about that top whatever group in the ACC. There's going to be raises across the board, but I mean, this is a big ripple for salaries, facilities, improvements, enhancements. It's really big, a really big signal out to agents, prospective coaches, really big. So there's some changes, obviously, with staff shakeups pretty high up that could open some things to allow some more university support that has maybe been blocked or not as easily allowed in years past with some moving pieces that I think will come to light here soon in the coming days. So it's not just about like what's going on the football field. There's still a lot going on, structural changes to how VT football operates, and it's going to be really big how you land this hire. I know a lot's been made of the GM search, and there's questions surrounding that. I think a lot of those questions will be answered here by the end of the week, honestly. I think you'll have some pretty clear answers on just how those searches are going, just how those are being facilitated. I think you'll have some more clarity on that. I'm not expecting an announcement or anything here. I wouldn't expect a GM announcement by the earliest of mid-October. I would probably aim closer to that late October. And obviously a head coach probably to fall mid-November, late November with the way those are going, as a ton more jobs are going to come open. So it's still very, very young in this entire process, still a lot to play out. But yeah, so I would watch for some announcements regarding that, some announcements from some people high up in the athletic department and just different things regarding that. But I would just tune into vtscoop.com is what I should implore you to do, because nuggets and honestly, just pretty blunt statements of some big sweeping changes coming will be dropping over there with intel as we get it. So it's going to be a busy week before the game and then pretty closely after the game with some things coming out. And vtscoop.com. We'll have you covered, even if not directly in the room. So next, talking about Philip Montgomery, his presser and obviously post-practice today. Some of those biggest things, I think, energy and like theme that I saw is relentless. As he talked about that, defining this team, just how relentless they've been. I think you looked at that 4th and 1 at NC State, how he just really loved and emphasized that Drones wanted it, but he trusted his defense. and there's just sweeping trust around the entire team. He touched on and talked about the budget a little bit. Obviously, for an interim coach, like we talked to him after practice today, and he's like, I still forgot I had to come talk to you guys after practice. So everyone's still settling in. So he was asked about the budget. He was like, well, I'll leave that for other people to answer. But he did talk about some availability notes. Obviously, the report, as Cam touched on, will come out tomorrow, Thursday, for the game Saturday. A couple of roster moves. Obviously, said Caleb Woodson and Quentin Reddish are a little banged up. That's what he listed them as or said. So no timeline on those guys. Obviously, reemphasized, as we touched on last week on Kolby's Corner, that Keyshawn Burgos and James Ajonkam are no longer with the football team. He praised some of those young guys, not worrying about the red shirts, which is expected at this point. You fired your head coach 3 games into the year. You're not looking at this from a real point where you can say, okay, let's save this shirt here. No, like you're going to play a guy like Noah Chambers. You're going to play a Sheldon Robinson. You're going to play the guys that give you the best chance to win, and those guys currently are doing that. He talked about Cam Seldon. Obviously, we talked to Cam Seldon, obviously, yesterday on Tuesday as well, as really kind of breaking down that slot, building some trust with drones, making some timely catches. I thought it was funny on Tuesday at his press conference, too. There was a quote where it was like, is it nice to just get out there and practice after all that's going on? And he pretty much said that's the best part of his day is when he gets to go out and coach football on the practice field, because there's a lot more that comes with being a head coach, obviously fielding questions from the media and different things. Some other availability notes said, obviously, Johnny Garrett's back. Talked about Eden Lynch, stepping up into a tough spot. Same with Remack and his flexibility, playing a lot of tackle and then moving back to guard. Said the offensive line's done a good job, albeit being patchwork. Now, 2 big question marks. Montavious Cunningham was very, very hobbled at the end of that NC State game. Was trying to run onto the field hobbled for the victory formation, but they pulled him back off. And then same with Lath Canham. I think he only played 3 snaps. Both those guys, he said, they're still kind of dinged up, but trending the right direction. We'll see more clarity on that in the injury report. And then something that we've been saying here on Kolby's Corner, Keelan Adams looks like he's projecting, maybe has a pretty good chance to play this weekend. I know I've taken my licks over on the board for saying that maybe a little preemptively in the past, but it does sound like things are progressing positively right there. For Caleb Brown, asked about him today, again, the Hawaii transfer cornerback, and really no update, said still working through some things, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be back anytime soon. So for the secondary, you're going to see more reps going to JoJo Krim, Jamari DeLoach, Sheldon Robinson. How about a guy like Thomas Williams? What a play on that last series on the pass breakup. He tackles that guy inbounds right before the first down marker inbounds, so the clock's running. Someone who I think gets so often overlooked in that secondary. I think Thomas Williams had a really nice game against NC State and has been playing well. So dump any questions in the chat. We'll try and touch on some of those before we run out, but vtscoop.com is the place to be. Heard some news about some stuff. Got a really active thread over there about some big sweeping potential changes or news going on. So definitely we want to go check that out here before the game. But yeah, from rock bottom at ODU, as Johnny Garrett laid it out, to a chance at 2-0 in the ACC, going up against a Wake Forest team that Cam really laid out pretty clearly the matchup. It's pretty crazy with the $229 million safety net that they have coming into. So it'll be pretty crazy. Here, I'll touch on a couple questions. Based on the record, how do you think the Miami game will shape up? I think Miami and Florida State's going to be a really big game this weekend for the ACC in general. I know a lot of people after the result last weekend in Charlottesville thinks Florida State is a complete pretender, is going to go get boat raced. This is a team that in Doak camp, they went and pretty much dominated an Alabama team that went into Sanford Stadium and beat Georgia. I think that Alabama team is really good. I think this Florida State team is really good. I think that Miami team is really good, but I think that game's going to be super close. I don't even know if I could make a prediction on it, but I think Miami's going to be a real national player, and I know people are a little gun shy, obviously, as they haven't lived up to the hype ever since entering the ACC that you saw with them in the Big East with multiple national championships. But this is a really, really legit team, great defense, added so much to that secondary. They've got great receivers helping Carson Beck, a really dominant front on both sides of the ball. Ruben Bain on defense could be arguably the Heisman winner, honestly, with what he's done if he played quarterback, if he just had a QB next to his name. But I think it's going to be a really, really tough game. I know they're coming up to Lane Stadium, and the next week they go to Pitt. That's tough for a South Florida team late in the year, but they're very, very talented. Do you anticipate the bully Terrence to increase carries against Wake Forest, or we see more of a split with the other running backs? Yeah, it's a great question. I was looking it up. We were talking about it over on the Inside the Tunnel podcast earlier. And the split, I know Marcellus Hawkins had 4. and Terran Stewart, he carried it 15 times. So Drones had 11, Hawkins had 4, and then Stewart carried it 15 times, I believe, or whatever it was. I would expect similar to more like we talked to Elijah Brooks, running back coach today, and obviously he's like, yeah, if running backs carry 50 times, we're going to ask for 51. So obviously fans, everyone's understanding, hey, let's run the ball more. But Montgomery elevated how they want to be balanced. And, they want to use the full length of the field. And I think game script will determine that. But yeah, that's such an asset. And I think it's going to be really big against this Wake team, like we touched on, time of possession, controlling the flow of the game, and just getting those guys activated. So I would expect more carries for him and maybe more of a more two-back set with him and Hawkins, and obviously mixing Drones in with what he can do. But you've seen, obviously, P.J. Prelo pop against a Wofford, and now Terran didn't play in that game. But now you got more hands on deck. But, yeah, that's what I would sort of start to expect this week. But like I said, we'll have another one of these right after the game on Saturday, live Kolby's Corner for instant reaction show. Availability updates over on the site as they drop tomorrow, along with some different content we're working on. Like I said, the message boards right now, as I started this show, they were blown up with some news going on. So I can only imagine what's going on over there right now at vtscoop.com. We'll have a bunch of insider access as there is so much going on behind the scenes in the athletics department, from all the way to C-suite level down, as the GM search is going on and eventually the head coaching search. No better place to find it than vtscoop.com. So if you want to stay in the know, if you want to be at the water cooler at work and have the most up-to-date insight, and that's the best place to get it from, vtscoop.com. So appreciate everyone jumping on here. Make sure to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, word of mouth. It's been a ton of fun, obviously, getting to do this, walking around, seeing people say they watch the show. So that means a ton. It's been a lot of fun. I know not everyone watching this, especially, is stoked on it, but, I appreciate everyone who is. So let's have a great rest of our week. If you're coming up to the game on Saturday, safe travels. Orange effect. Obviously, the uniforms dropped earlier with the white on orange lids. Pretty nifty. So expecting a pretty decent crowd after the NC State result. Hearing a lot of people bought back in. Obviously, homecoming. A lot of festivities to have the parade on Main Street on Friday. Expecting a ton of people to come through. So if you're coming up on Saturday, have a safe trip. Enjoy the game. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless everyone. See you right after the game for a live Kolby's Corner. Till then, find me on the VT Scoop message boards. All right, see you. God bless. Have a good night.